It is time for today's tough question. It's brought to you by our friends at Zool Beer Company, the official craft beer of Off the Hook Sports. Today's tough question is now.
Today's tough question. Take a side. Take a stand. The Dave Hooker Show, a presentation of offthehooksports.com.
Zool Beer, XULbeer.com, the official craft beer of Off the Hook Sports. Convenient parking downtown, a worldwide award-winning craft beer. Tennessee, today's tough question, where they seated too high, too low, just right at a 4 seed in the East region. And lump this together with your take on this, Caleb. They not only received the 4 seed, but in my opinion, they received the lowest 4 seed because they got in the bracket of Duke, Purdue. It's an incredibly tough bracket. This is just me eyeballing this thing, but I thought they got the lowest 4 seed of the group. I would rather be any of the other 4 seeds in any of the other quarters of the bracket. So what did you think? Tennessee seated too high, too low, or just right?
See, I disagree. I actually think they got a favorable 4 seed. Funny enough, it may be the lowest technically of numbers, but in terms of matchups, I'd rather Purdue be the number 1 seed in my bracket than Alabama or who was the other number 1 seed that wasn't Kansas? My mind just completely went blank.
But don't we think that? But we think Purdue is probably the overall number 2 seed, right?
I think Houston was the overall number 2 seed. Purdue was the overall number 3. Purdue lives and dies by defense. I think those are the type of teams that Tennessee can beat because both of them play an outdated style of play. And so I do think that's an advantage for Tennessee. I think, in all honesty, I think they were seated too high. And I know that's a hot take, but this team lost 10 games.
Too high as a 4 or too high as a lower 4?
Too high as a 4, period.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they were seated too high as a 4, period. They lost 10 games this year. They got swept by Kentucky. They basically got swept by Missouri, losing once at home and once on a neutral site. They lost at home to Vanderbilt. They lost to Colorado. I think what is selling for Tennessee right now is their quality wins, which the NCAA they're overusing the net rankings. Tennessee's got 2 really good wins. They got more than that, but their 2 main ones are against 2 number 1 seeds, Kansas and Alabama. Alabama, the overall number 1 seed, and they beat Kansas on a neutral court. No issue there. Take nothing away from them. They also beat Texas. If you've really followed the landscape of college basketball this year, though, you aren't that shocked that Tennessee beat Alabama and Texas at home. Because it's just been such a rocky year for college basketball teams on the road. And Tennessee has been anything but good away from home since SEC play started. And I don't know how you could look at that. Now, I know they're not supposed to look at this, but you also have to look at they don't have their starting point guard and look at what you saw in the conference tournament, which I know they placed no emphasis on, but they finished their last 10 games 4-6. And
well, that to me is the biggest number. I think the 2 biggest factors in order: number 1, 4-6, didn't look great doing it, and I think number 2 is Zakai Ziegler. And you may say, "Oh, that's not fair. He got him to this point," but they tell you that they factor that in. And don't think for a second that the College Football Playoff Committee is not going to do the same thing. I thought they did with Hendon Hooker. That's the only reason I can figure out how Alabama was rated ahead of Tennessee despite the head-to-head win. So they're going to factor that in. This is a made-for-television event. And this is also the goal is if you're the committee, you want to create good matchups. You'll never say that, but you also want your best teams to survive. So it's hard for me for those 2 reasons with one of your key players out and going 4-6 in your last 10 to call Tennessee one of the best teams that you're like, ooh, I hope they get there to that 16, 8, or 4 because they're hot. They're fire, as the kids say. I don't see that out of Tennessee. So if you're complaining about your seeding, which you like it a little bit better than I do, if you're complaining about your seeding, then you've got nobody to complain but yourself. And as Caleb pointed out, you might have been a little fortunate because I had no problem with a 4 either way. I would have been surprised at a 3, and I thought a 5 would have been too low personally. But you're splitting hairs when you're either a 1 or a 2, and the chances of you winning are like 95% the first game, and you get a favorable matchup in the second round. So you're either 1 or 2, or you're kind of just everybody else to some extent until you get down to 14, 15, and 16.
Yeah, I agree. I think it goes with tiers. You're a 1 or a 2, or you're a 3 to 6.
Yes.
Now, 7 to 10, you don't want to be either, because then you end up playing a 1 or a 2 in the second round. And that's always a dangerous matchup when you do that. But you're right. You're 1 to 2. 1 to 2 is one tier. 3 to 6 is another. 7 to 10 is another. You're right. 11 to 14 is another. And then 15 and 16. That's where you're.
15 and 16, you're probably going home after the first night.
Exactly. It's a big deal when a 15 seed beats a 2 seed, and a 16 team has done it only once. And ironically, the team they did it against, Virginia, won the national title the next year, which is still hilarious.
Now, I'm interested in what people say on the message board, because Tennessee, I believe historically, when I covered them really, really closely, and they were really, really good in the early 2000s, I thought did get the short end of the stick when it came to the selection committee. I thought there were times they should have been a 2 and they were a 4, or they should have been a 4 and they were 6. And I don't think Tennessee's viewed as a basketball school. I think if you're sitting down and there's a gray area between a Tennessee and a North Carolina, just throw a team out there, or a Tennessee and a Kentucky and one of the blue bloods, I think the blue bloods are going to get the benefit of the doubt from a seeding standpoint. Would you argue with that, Caleb, or do you think that's pretty much the case?
No, there is plenty of evidence for that. And on the women's side, just so people know, that happens on the women's side too. Tennessee always gets a favorable matchup on the women's side. Always. And they always will. And
yes. So I didn't really have a problem with a 4. I don't feel like you're just crazy upset about it, right? That they should have been a 5. Maybe should have been a 5, but
yeah, I'm not crazy
upset. Been a 3. Could.
I don't think they could be a 3.
A little bit of a reach, but
23 and 10. That's just I get the schedule, but it just doesn't look like a good record on paper.
See, here's what you have to do, though. You have to factor in they're trying to get more people to these games, so they're going to factor in where they play as well. So sometimes that can get you up or down a seed higher than you should, because there were a couple of times where they would ship teams wherever, and I think it was me, 5 other reporters, and about 100 Tennessee fans, and that's the only people that were in some of these first round games, because it's expensive. I mean, if you want to put this together, I mean, if you want to go out to some distant place and follow your team, and you book a flight, you not booked flights before. I mean, it's expensive this time of year. So, I mean, if you're going to do it 4 days before your team heads out,
and you don't even know if you're going to get 1 or 2 games out of it.
Yeah. So you can get shifted around a lot. I think Tennessee's in Orlando, right?
Yeah, which they should be happy about.
Yeah, which, I mean, that's drivable. Miserable drivable, trust me. And you don't want to go to Disney World because it gets just hot as blue blazes out there. The 2 hottest places in the world are Washington, D.C. and Orlando, just for the record. And they are the source of the most misery, perhaps, in our country, depending on if you have kids and what age they are. So new ones on board right now. Hit the like button. Go ahead and subscribe.